Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event here at the Jesus College Intellectual Forum. It's great to have you, whether you're in this wonderful Frankopan Hall space here, which is so lovely, or you're joining us online. It's great to have so many of you from wherever in the world you happen to be. Do come on in. You're very welcome to be here. My name's Julian Huppert. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum here, and so I have the great role of introducing wonderful people to talk about fascinating things, and tonight will be no exception. It's particularly exciting to host this event because it's a return to a theme that we looked at before. So a couple of years ago now, we held a series of events looking at death and dying in a whole range of different perspectives. One of those looked at voluntary assisted dying, we looked at the hospice movement, and we had a spectacular talk from a brilliant academic, Kasia. We're going to hear some even more brilliant work from her, as well as a whole range of other panelists about this really brilliant project. I'm not going to say too much about this. I will hand over to the wonderful team to talk about this for the rest of the evening. So it's my great pleasure to introduce an old friend and colleague. Stephen Cave has been in Cambridge for a while. He's the academic director of the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, and has even managed to set up an Institute of Technology and the Humanities above that. He's done many, many things. I could talk about the books he's written. I could talk about his role in tearing Europe asunder, but I think we will move on from that one. It wasn't his fault. But it's great to have you with us here tonight, Stephen, to introduce this phenomenal event. So, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you for having us here at the Intellectual Forum. It's always a great pleasure to be here. Jesus, I have to admit, it sounds different talking about being here with Jesus when we're talking about immortality. It reminds me of that joke, and Jesus said, "Come forth, and ye shall be given eternal life." But I came fifth, and all I got was a T-shirt. I'm literally wearing the T-shirt now. Anyway, yes, so as Julian said, I'm the academic director of the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, and the co-director of the institute in which it sits. And my own research interests span the ethics and impact of AI on one hand, and the philosophy of mortality and immortality on the other. And I've often alternated work between the two, but I'm delighted that we have one project out of our many, many projects which actually brings the two together, and that's this project on digital immortality. So thank you for that, Kasia. So we're going to be talking about the intersection of technology and mortality and immortality, our relationship to death. And we all know death as a biological event, of course, the cessation of our functioning as an organism. We think of it as a psychological event, the relationship we each have to our own mortality and the psychological impact of losing someone, of being left behind. And death is also well studied as a cultural phenomenon, the rites and the rituals around it, the stories we tell about it. But what I think is underestimated is death as a technological phenomenon, as technologically mediated. Now, of course, we're very good at developing technologies that bring about death. We're not bad at developing technologies that prevent or delay death. But what I'm really interested in is technologies that mediate our relationship to the dead. Now think, for example, of ancient Egypt. We think, of the great monuments, everything that they've left behind for us to admire comes from their elaborate death rites and rituals and beliefs. But mummification, for example, wasn't just a cultural practice or a religious practice, it was also a technological practice. They were able to preserve bodies for 4,000 years and going. It's an astonishing technological feat that changed their relationship with the dead, as well as being informed by that relationship. Or if we fast forward, think of photography, invented almost exactly 200 years ago. For the vast majority of human history, the vast majority of humans left nothing behind. Studies show that most people do not know the names or the faces of their great-grandparents. So for most of human history, within 3 generations, people have disappeared. Maybe a line in a church register, nothing more. And photography, of course, completely changed this. And now we see photographs at the center of many funeral practices. And we all have a different relationship to our deceased loved ones because we can see them. But that, of course, was just a snapshot. Now we have a technology that is completely transforming our relationship to the dead, that isn't just a still snapshot like a photograph, but can reanimate them in ways that allow us to re-engage with them. These digital avatars that we've come here to talk about tonight, just 10 years ago they were still a dream. There were people working towards them. But with the huge leaps that we've seen in AI and in the enormous amounts of data that we leave behind us, it is now, this is not futuristic, it is now possible to reanimate the dead in ways that allow you to interact with them, to remember with them, to laugh with them, to seek advice from them. And that technology is only going to continue to improve exponentially. This is going to have a profound impact on our relationship with the deceased. Now, death is, of course, something that impacts all of us. Increasingly, AI is impacting all of us, but very few people have been studying the intersection of those two phenomena. So I'm delighted that in our center we have someone, Katarzyna Kasia, who has been pioneering the study of what she calls digital immortality. So Katarzyna is an assistant research professor in our center. She's also a Schmidt Sciences junior research fellow. And she's been pursuing this really path-breaking project for recent years, which I've had the pleasure of following and partaking in. I'm going to hand over to her now to tell you more about it, and then a few of us who are on the project team are going to get together for a panel discussion where, of course, we also want to hear your questions and your views. But before we get to that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Katarzyna Nowaczyk-Basińska, who's going to tell you about her research.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen, for this very kind introduction. Thank you, Julian. Good evening, everyone. 10 years ago, I walked into my supervisor's office in Poland, and I told her that I would like to write my PhD on digital immortality. All right, she said, slightly surprised, but this topic is very unlikely to be accepted by the doctoral commission, and you know that, right? Back then, digital immortality sounded very suspicious. There were barely no companies working on it. AI wasn't yet powerful enough to keep its promises of post-mortem interaction, and the research community was scattered and very, very small. So here's what we will do, she said. You can work. We will find the way to convince the doctoral commission that it's valid. But for now, we need a safer equivalent. So I went to my entrance exam and proposed a topic on immortality in the work of the Italian theater director Romeo Castellucci. The commission was delighted. They admitted me as the first candidate on the list, and I was delighted too. But the very next day, I put that topic aside and started completely from scratch, working on the idea of digital immortality. And today, 10 years later, we are in a completely different situation. Today, a grieving parent can put on a VR headset and meet their deceased child in a digital environment. Today, in courtrooms, avatars of martyred individuals are allowed to testify. We can attend concerts by artists who died decades ago, and deceased grandparents who can read bedtime stories to their grandchildren. We are in the middle of a technocultural experiment, and AI is undeniably changing one of the most intimate and difficult human experiences of death, dying, and grief. In 2023, I came here to Cambridge for the first time as a visiting scholar, thanks to the support of Professor Stephen Cave, this time with the real topic, no fakes, no twists. And the term digital afterlife industry had already gained traction, signaling the rapid growth of this sector. More and more scholars were engaging with questions of digital death and dying. Large language models had just been introduced to general public, and grief bots, dead bots, post-mortem avatars were starting to make headlines. As global attention around digital immortality intensified, I began to notice a troubling pattern. Digital immortality was increasingly presented as a kind of universal remedy for death and grief, as if post-mortem avatars could almost magically erase loss, comfort the bereaved, and offer a form of immortality to anyone willing to engage with this technology. Death is universal, but the ways we respond to it are not. They are shaped by local rituals, moral frameworks, different social imaginaries. So assuming that digital tools will solve or even fit these experiences in the same way felt like a serious oversimplification. And with this in mind, I first tried to secure funding in Poland for a cross-cultural research project on digital immortality. It was rejected twice. And then I was appointed to the Schmidt Sciences AI 2050 program. And the call was for projects described as multidisciplinary, ambitious, innovative, risky, unusual, and bold, but also previously rejected elsewhere. And I thought, all right, at least the rejection criterion is met here. And when the results came in and the project Imaginaries of Immortality in the Age of AI was awarded, I felt both extremely excited and genuinely terrified. Excited because it was recognized as multidisciplinary, ambitious, innovative, risky, unusual, and bold, and terrified for exactly the same reasons. My research was guided by two central questions. How do people in different cultural contexts perceive the idea of digital immortality? And what are the alternatives, ways of conceptualizing digital immortality in the age of AI that arise from different cultural backgrounds? And with those questions in mind, together with my brilliant collaborators, Professor Stephen Cave, Dr. Tomasz Holanek, Dr. Maja Indira Ganesh, Dr. Saida Mubayed-Vega, Ania Franczak, and Tomasz Siuda, we set off. Between November 2024 and April 2025, we traveled to Poland, India, and China and organized 12 research activities in total, 3 experts workshops and 9 focus groups, engaging around 100 participants. And before turning to some preliminary findings and insights, I would like to take you now on a brief visual journey. I'm going to share a 10-minute documentary from our fieldwork with footage by Tomasz Siuda, which offers a glimpse into what we experience on the ground. I remember vividly the first time I encountered the idea of digital immortality nearly a decade ago. I was still a student when I stumbled upon a website advertising post-mortem avatars. Intrigued by this idea, a wave of questions began to surface. Where are these technologies taking us? Why do we turn to AI in such intimate moments of death and dying? Is digital immortality really part of the future we desire? My name is Katarzyna Nowaczyk-Basińska, and I am the principal investigator of the project Imaginaries of Immortality in the Age of AI, an intercultural analysis founded by Schmidt Sciences and hosted by the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge. Together with my team, I've traveled thousands of kilometers through Poland, India, and China to explore how people from different cultural backgrounds make sense of digital immortality. Over the past few months, we've collaborated across multiple time zones, partnered with 5 international institutions, and engaged in deep conversations with more than 30 local experts and 70 non-experts. It's been a journey shaped by language barriers, cultural nuances, and above all, a profound opportunity to listen to the diverse imaginaries people hold about immortality, death, memory, and what it means to live on. In each location, the project's research methods consisted of 2 main activities, an experts workshop and 3 focus groups titled Immortality over Dinner. The experts workshops were designed for individuals working at the intersection of death, grief, and technology. We engage in conversation with artists, academics, palliative care professionals, members of the funeral industry, community organizers, and spiritual and religious leaders. We were guided by the belief that understanding digital immortality requires a collective effort, one that brings together diverse perspectives, skills, experiences, and values. We began our exploration in November 2024 in Poznań, Poland, by examining the ideas, norms, and traditions that surface in discussions around the digital immortality.
Already today we've heard fascinating insights about the influence of the Catholic Church in Poland and the tensions between science and technology on the one hand and religion on the other. We've had really interesting insights about the particularities of Polish rituals around death and the ways in which digital technology might be used to help people to connect with their loved ones. And at the same time, we've heard skepticism and ethical considerations.
Our next stop in February 2025 was India, New Delhi, a vibrant cosmopolitan city. There, conversations with local experts delved into the interplay between tradition and modernity and how new technologies shape perceptions and experiences of death, dying, and grief.
I've also been really curious about this technology for 2 reasons. One is that it is a very new kind of application and it's troubling. It's changing and destabilizing what is already a very challenging human experience. We're not trained to deal with death. It's such a dark subject and we don't know how to deal with it. And here's a technology application that is forcing us to confront death, confront what comes after death, and by virtue of that, what it means to be human.
The final stop on this intense academic and cultural journey was Beijing, China, visited in April 2025, a place where an incredibly rich and long philosophical tradition intersects with emerging technologies, raising new questions and unexpected dilemmas.
So, for example, we've heard from Taoists, and Taoism has always been committed to the pursuit of immortality, and the Taoist philosophers we've spoken to have been really enthusiastic about the possibility of digital technology in helping them realize this ancient dream of immortality. But at the same time, we've spoken to Buddhist philosophers who think this is all just a distraction, that we ought to be letting go of worldly desires and worldly things and worldly attachments, and digital immortality might be a way of holding on to those when we ought to be letting go.
In addition to in-depth discussions, experts in all 3 locations participated in 2 speculative design exercises moderated by Dr. Tomasz Holanek, who took on the role of a representative from a fictional US-based tech company. The experts acted as consultants, offering culturally grounded, critical, and sensitive advice on how to design digital immortality products.
What was clear from the second exercise, again in all 3 locations in India, Poland, and China, was that the digital afterlife industry cannot be only profit-driven, and that the duty of care should be guiding all design choices made in this space, for instance, making sure that the services that the industry provides are not addictive.
While the insights from our experts' workshops were invaluable, this project also champions the idea that high-level strategies surrounding death, dying, and immortality should be rooted in everyday experiences and intimate practices. To truly attune ourselves to those personal stories, we hosted 9 Immortality over Dinner events in Poznań, New Delhi, and Beijing, bringing together participants with no expertise in digital immortality. Around the table were younger and older guests, believers and non-believers, professors, and individuals with diverse educational backgrounds, people who had experienced loss, and those who had not yet faced it. Each dinner began with a screening of the documentary Eternal You, directed by Hans Bloch and Moritz Rieswig. Then we shared a meal where we talked, laughed, and cried together, embracing diverse perspectives with openness and care.
During those meetings, we spoke about very delicate matters, so it was crucial to create an atmosphere in which people feel safe, in which they can share very personal and intimate stories and opinions. So that's why we did not set it up as a classical academic research format, but I designed it as a ceremony in a ritual way. So it was an experience that was not only meant to inspire people on an intellectual level, but there were sensual elements that spoke more to our subconscious, that opened people to get in touch with their bodies, with their different senses and with their emotions.
At the end of each dinner, participants were invited to take part in a short photo session conducted by the professional photographer Tomasz Siuda. On one level, it extended the atmosphere of the evening, intimate, reflective, and grounded in shared presence. On another, it gently echoed the tradition of post-mortem portraits, one of the photography's earliest roles in preserving the image of the deceased. The resulting black and white portraits of participants offered a subtle visual dialogue with the photographs of departed loved ones they had been asked to bring, quietly bridging past and present, life and death. What have we taken away from this intellectually and emotionally charged cross-cultural dialogue? First and foremost, we learned that navigating digital immortality goes beyond technological innovation. It shakes the core of who we are, opening the possibilities to reimagine a future where we find new ways to restore communities that can support us through the end of life. We encourage new kinds of professionals to help us steward our post-mortem legacies with care. We implement thoughtful design, meaningful regulation, inclusive ethical guidelines, and stronger protection for the users of these technologies. And above all, a future where AI helps us confront death in a responsible, meaningful, and compassionate way, deepening our understanding of what it means to be human. All right. And now you might be wondering why we chose Poland, India, and China. So first, they represent very different approaches to death and death care. Poland reflects a predominantly Catholic model of mourning. India is shaped by religiously plural and highly ritualized traditions that emphasize continuing bonds with ancestors, and China is influenced by philosophical traditions such as Confucian filial piety alongside strong state governance funerary practices. At the same time, across these three countries, we've seen growing interest in digital immortality technologies in very different settings. So in Poland, for instance, national radio recreated the voice of Nobel Prize-winning poet Wisława Szymborska, which generated a lot of public controversy. In India, the politician Muthuwal Karunanidhi was digitally resurrected and his bot was used in an election campaign. In China, the digital afterlife sector has grown so much that some scholars suggest that it's now the largest in the world. That said, choosing these countries doesn't suggest that they hold any special or privileged position. This is exploratory research aimed at opening a dialogue between different perspectives, and many other cultural contexts especially in the global south, such as Latin America or Africa, would be equally important to study. It's also worth stressing that this was a qualitative research, and as such, it was never designed to produce a single picture or a monolithic idea of culture. Instead, the goal was to listen to many different voices and explore perspectives rather than average them out. And we weren't looking for any statistical generalizations, but for particularities. And that's why we treat participant responses not as representative data, but as epistemic statements, forms of knowledge shaped by specific professional role, cultural backgrounds, and personal experiences. So when I speak about Chinese, Polish, or Indian perspective, I'm not referring to any universal truth, but I'm referring to situated viewpoints that emerge in particular moments through particular encounters. And when I was designing this research, I had the intuition that it would be crucial to bring together elements that don't usually sit easily together. So I wanted to speak with local experts who work with deaf professionally, but at the same time stay close to everyday experiences of death, dying, and grief. I wanted to create a space for critical reflection on digital immortality, while also encouraging participants to imagine alternatives and think about what better futures with these technologies might look like. I wanted the project to be academically rigorous and solid, but at the same time, still offering participants a relaxed, meaningful, and informal experience. So the real challenge was finding a way for all of these elements to work in synergy rather than falling into contradiction. And I remember one particular dinner in China. It was held at a charitable nonprofit known for providing free lunches to seniors and supporting local hospice care. And for this dinner, we decided to offer simultaneous translation so that participants could speak in their own language. And to be honest, I was very worried about this. I feared that the whole equipment, the headphones, microphones, the professional booth, might disrupt the flow of the conversation and break the intimacy around the table. But I was completely wrong. After just a few minutes, we almost forgot the technology was there. And just next door, behind a curtain, there was a small kitchen. 2 women were cooking for us and bringing food to the table. And one of them, whenever she had a spare moment, would step away from her work, sit down on the bench next to us, put on a pair of headphones, and quietly listen to the stories being shared. And then she would return to the kitchen, stir the pots, and come back again to listen. And that moment captures something essential for me, something I had deeply hoped for. What we were discussing wasn't just a fabricated or abstract issue. It genuinely drew people in. It sparked curiosity and engagement, regardless of profession, background, or geography. And everyone felt invited to the table to share their stories and to listen to the stories of others. At the same time, death, despite being profoundly intimate and personal, is also a social event. It's embedded in norms, institutions, shared structures, and that is why we also invited experts to the table so they could help us understand a bigger picture. And when I say experts, I mean a multidisciplinary group of professionals working at the intersection of death and technology. And together with Dr. Tomasz Holanek, we developed a list of 7 categories of experts we thought should be represented in the discussion. And in this project, expertise is understood as collective, distributed, and relational. Why is it important? because designers working in AI can create technically convincing representation of the deceased, but they need philosophers and ethicists to guide them through issues such as dignity or consent. And at the same time, philosophers and ethicists need to stay connected to lived experiences, listening to those who work with dying people and their families, such as palliative care professionals and members of the funeral industry. And when palliative care professionals start imagining how these technologies might be used at the end of life, they may need artists to engage with deeply sensitive questions, aesthetic questions, such as how should these avatars look? Should they age? Should they include disability, remain static, or evolve over time? And I could go on, pointing to many moments where different forms of expertise complemented one another or created a productive friction during those workshops. And one important lesson I learned is this: the distinction between expert and non-expert when we discuss death and dying is not a qualitative one. What truly matters is the diversity of voices, and it is this diversity that is essential if we want to shape the digital afterlife industry in a responsible way. The two most contested issues around digital immortality, and we saw this repeatedly in Poland, India, and China, were first commercial models underpinning the digital afterlife industry, and second, the potentially harmful psychological effects these technologies can have of the living, of the users of these technologies. And these concerns are absolutely valid, and we explored them in depth. But I strongly believe that we are living in the moment when the task of humanities is not only to critically diagnose reality, but also to formulate affirmative propositions, propositions that lay the foundations for creative actions. And that's why, in this study, we encouraged participants to think about the future they actually want to live in. And the ideas they shared were truly thought-provoking. So rather than replicating the deceased and pretending that death hasn't changed our relationships, many participants argued that we should use AI to help us confront death and normalize this experience. As one expert in India said, maybe dying is a skill, something that we should practice, something that we should learn, something that should be taught. And maybe AI can assist us in this process so we are better prepared for that moment. Another recurring idea was that we should not allow commercial companies to monopolize the experience of death and profit from pain and grief. Instead, we might redesign the existing social-cultural infrastructures by involving NGOs and public actors, or creating systems in which profits generated by this industry are redistributed back into society. And finally, several participants argued that we should work just as hard on technologies that help us forget. In the digital afterlife industry, remembering is often seen as inherently positive. What we risk losing from this focus is the value of forgetting. Forgetting, oblivion, disappearance can also be conscious and intentional choices, and we should create mechanisms to make this possible as well. And what I learned from these conversations is that the digital afterlife industry is not set in stone. If we are not happy with the way it's currently taking shape, there is a wealth of alternative ideas that we can try out. And many of them begin simply by telling different stories and by imagining that things could be arranged differently. The idea of organizing immortality over dinner was inspired by death over dinner concept, developed by Michael Hebb in the United States a few years ago. And the premise here is simple and very powerful. People are invited to talk about their hopes, fears, and wishes around death while sharing a meal in an inclusive and relaxed setting. The dinner table becomes a space where different conversations can unfold naturally and honestly. And together with Ania Franczek, we spent a long time designing the dinners, blending rigorous academic format with non-academic elements. And we also worked closely with local partners to make sure we weren't crossing cultural boundaries or putting participants in uncomfortable situations. But I remember the three of us, the dinner team, Ania, Tomasz, and myself, in New Delhi the day before the first dinner. A wave of doubts washed over us. What if nobody comes? We are complete strangers. Why would anyone show up? And even if they do, will they be willing to talk about such a delicate topic? And yet, every single evening at exactly 6 o'clock, people began to arrive. At first, they were a little confused, but minute by minute, they grew more open, more engaged, more willing to share, far more than we had ever hoped or imagined. And it would not be an exaggeration to say that in many of these dinners, we began as complete strangers and ended with the feeling that a small community had formed over those 3 hours. People shared a meaningful experience together, and that was what bonded us so deeply in that moment. After one dinner in China, one participant said to us, "Please stay with us. We need communities like this. We need spaces where we can talk about death and dying." Another person in India said, "It was a form of meditation for me. I was meditating with you, and that became a prayer for my ancestors." And someone in Poland said, "We talk about death, that's it, and that is already precious." And now, in the last part of this presentation, let me briefly show you how all of these experiences and conversations, the meals, the toast for the dead, the photographs, surveys, how all of this fit into theory and what this project contributes academically. So the first area of contribution sits at the intersection of design, AI ethics, and digital immortality. The first output is a paper titled "Who Designs the Digital Afterlife? Towards Participatory and Culturally Sensitive AI Design Practices in the Digital Afterlife Industry." And in this paper, together with Dr. Tomasz Holanek, we offer practical recommendations for designing digital afterlife technologies across cultures, but we also argue that design isn't just about interfaces, about features, or even about technology, but about shaping an entire ecosystem of digital immortalization. The second area of contribution sits at the intersection of sociology of profession, ethics of care, and social innovation. And the paper is titled "Towards a New Ethics of Care for the Dead in the Age of AI, a cross-cultural response to the professionalization of the digital afterlife industry." And in this paper, together with Dr. Saida Mobayed Vega, we present findings related to the emergence of a new professional role, the digital afterlife leader or the digital afterlife caregiver, whose main task would be to support users in navigating their digital legacy. And we gathered almost 100 responses from both experts and non-experts in Poland, India, and China. And there was a striking level of agreement that such a profession is not only relevant, but urgently needed and could lead to meaningful change in how these technologies are developed and governed. The third area of contribution sits at the intersection of science, art, ritual, and ceremony. This one is a methodological paper on the dinner format in which, together with Ania Franczak, we conceptualize dinners as an effective research tool, but at the same time, effective educational method and a powerful way of building bottom-up knowledge in a safe relational setting. Another major outcome of this research is a book, Immortality, Contemporary Technocultural Strategies, which is set to launch this month by the Polish publisher Universitas. And this book just arrived yesterday from Poland, so it's still warm and I can't stop smiling when I look at this. And the book builds on my PhD and is complemented by findings from this cross-cultural research. And in this book, I set myself a fairly ambitious goal to introduce and argue for a new discipline, which I call immortality studies, a field that goes beyond traditional death studies and creates a new conceptual framework for a range of questions that existing frameworks cannot fully address. Together with Dr. Saida Mubayed-Vega, we also prepared a public-facing report to ensure that non-academic public can also access this research and its findings. The report is already available on the project website. And I'm also happy to say that this project has inspired a range of additional creative works, initially not planned at all. One of them is a photographic installation which you'll have the chance to experience this evening and which will likely be shown in other locations as well. This project also inspired a theatrical performance which is preparing by Marta Malinowska and explores Polish cultural Imaginaries of Immortality. It further gave rise to Poetic Intervention, a beautiful poetry collection by Joanna Żebnicka titled Interrupted Conversations on Immortality. The project has also received wide international media coverage, including BBC World News, Reuters, NPR, Scientific American, and major media outlets across Europe, including Greece, Spain, Germany, Poland. And this project will also feature in a documentary, AI and Grief, by Australian filmmaker Wayne Tyndall, as well as in a documentary by Canadian filmmakers, Professors Manfred Becker and Julia Creed, who accompanied our team during the Indian phase of this research. All right, this project has been fueled by an enormous amount of energy and interest from around the world. And I'm presenting it to you today, but I certainly wouldn't be standing here without the support of many institutions and many people. And I would like to take a moment now to acknowledge them. So first, my sincere thanks to Schmidt Sciences for funding this project and for their trust and truly extraordinary support throughout, as well as to the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence for being such a wonderful home for this research. To my immortality team, brilliant researchers, professionals, colleagues, and friends, thank you so much for your hard work, for your commitment, creativity, care. To our partners in Poland, India, and China, the Institute of the Good Deaf, Zamek Cultural Center, the Goethe Institute in Poland, Ashoka University, and the Berggruen Institute in China. Thank you so much for your engagement and for helping us bring this project to life on the ground. And of course, huge thanks to all our expert and non-expert participants who shared their time, stories, and experiences with such openness and trust. And this work simply wouldn't exist without you. And finally, thank you to the Jesus Intellectual Forum for hosting us today and for creating this beautiful space for this conversation. Thank you once again so much to all of you for being part of this project and for being with us today. Thank you.
Well, thank Thank you, Kasia, for sharing those insights into the project. And can I invite you to join me now on one of these chairs, and also Saida and Anya. But in response to your thanks to us for joining the project, well, frankly, you have me at dinner as a research tool. How could I resist? I just think we need to convince the UKRI now of the importance of dinner as a research tool. Now, I think we're also being joined by Tomasz Holonek. Is he going to appear on screen at any moment?
If you can hear me.
Ah, Tom, hi. So this is, let's hope, your pre-mortem avatar. I don't know if you can prove that. Tell us what you had for breakfast. Naleśniki. Yep.
I had pączki yesterday. It was Fat Friday in Poland yesterday, so I'm very much alive.
Right, excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. So I'm going to introduce those of the panelists you haven't met yet one at a time and ask them to say a bit about what they do, and then, of course, open it up to questions and comments from you. So let's stay with you for a moment, Tom. So Tomasz Holonek, who you saw in Kasia's video, Tom, like Kasia, is an assistant research professor at our centre, the Liebman Centre for the Future of Intelligence, and also an affiliated lecturer in the Department of Computer Science here in Cambridge, where he works on the intersection of AI ethics, critical design, and human-AI interaction. Tom, could you say a bit about what it means to take a critical design approach to digital immortality?
Wow, okay. So I think critical design is in many ways responding or trying to respond to this question that Kasia raised, allowing philosophers to influence how we practice things, in particular how we design technologies, how we design objects. But also the other way around, for philosophers to actually think about the practical implications of their thinking and of their work. Critical design is also an entry point for non-professional designers to think about what kind of technologies they would like to use and how these could be designed. So obviously this is why critical design and critical and speculative design played such a big part in the project, where it allowed us to open up a space for people who do think about death, think about immortality, think about ethics, and think about business opportunities as well, because we did have some technologists and innovators at all the experts workshops, but to think collaboratively about how these technologies could be designed differently, precisely through the conversation between critique and design.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. For those of us like me, trained more in philosophical traditions, it's been a real revelation working with critical designers who take such a participatory approach to building responsible technology. So we will come back to that. But first, let me introduce Saida, who you've also seen mentioned, Dr. Saida Mobayed-Vega, who's a fellow in qualitative methods at the LSE and a research assistant at our centre working with Kasia. Saida did her PhD here at Cambridge in sociology, looking at how data and digital technologies influence concepts of truth, accountability and justice in context of gender-based violence and human rights violations. Saida, could you tell us a bit about the cross-cultural aspects of this work, the challenges and the joys of that kind of this kind of cross-cultural work?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of the back end of the project, and you often with technologies, you tend to see them as seamless and very efficient, but there's a lot of work behind. And together with Kasia and the team, we were in charge of this. And as the project talks about, we also faced lots of cultural variations in between contexts. And just to give you an example, the surveys we collected were on Google survey. And we couldn't do this in China, so they had to print it and they had to fill it by hand, and then I had to fill it in the Google form here in the UK. So this is just an example of the cross-cultural variations and the challenges that it takes to gather, over 100 people into a conversation. And yeah, I could outline many other issues that we faced, but it is at the back-end aspect of the project highlights how situated knowledge can be and how situated bureaucracies are as well, and how situated technologies also are, and the way we access them and can play with them. So, yeah.
And I know you spend a lot of time building relationships with our local partners who were really crucial to delivering this project.
Absolutely, absolutely. Without them, this wouldn't have happened, really. And they weren't there just facilitating the everyday, but they were also providing the cultural sensitivity that we all needed in order to understand how to operate at that level. So it was crucial to have them there and have them help us understand and navigate various hurdles. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. And we are also joined by Anya Franczek, who designed and moderated the focus groups, as you saw on the film. And Anya is by profession an educator in the field of dying, death and grief, and founder of the Institute of the Good Death, which is an award-winning social movement in Poland. Anya, could you talk a bit about the role of rituals in coming to terms with death, our own and those of other people, and how that fed into your design of the dinners?
Well, I think when we look at the big events over the span of a human life, there are certain transitions where there are very, very deep changes in our lives, and across cultures and across history, what we humans have been doing and are still doing is we enter into a ritual space when we need to adapt to big changes, especially when changes are so profound that it's difficult to grasp them logically. Like when a beloved person has died, it's just impossible at the beginning to believe that this is real. And when we see what people do all over the world when somebody has died, it's not a pragmatic approach. We don't just throw a body into a hole and cover it with earth, but there is so much more around it because we are so much more than pragmatic beings.
Now, Kasia, you talked about using AI to learn to die better as opposed to deny death. There is a long tradition of using technology to deny the reality and inevitability of death. And in a way we see that, as I mentioned at the beginning, in these dreams of uploading our minds and so on. But you said that you hoped that we could use AI to learn to die better. What does that mean?
We need to figure that out. But like the idea behind this is that we shouldn't focus solely on producing technologies that cheat us, that death doesn't need to change anything. But we need to think in a different way. Maybe an AI can assist us with normalize this experience. And I don't have a clear answer to this, and I don't know how to build technology like this. But I think that's a very interesting path and direction to explore. And we heard this in Poland, India, and China, that stop thinking about digital post-mortem avatars. Let's think differently, more creatively, and let's be more open.
I have a good example, actually, because I work as a death doula also in Poland, and when people get the information that they can now, or that should now access hospice care, it's not always the case that there immediately is a free place in a hospital, in a hospice, or that the system is just not sufficient. So sometimes, or rather too often, people end up at home with a dying person in their family, not knowing what is going on and not yet being able to access information or support. And I recently had to do with a family that in that situation, when their grandmother was dying, they spoke with ChatGPT, and they told ChatGPT, now she is breathing like this, now her skin looks like this, what does it mean, how should we react? So basically, a bot was their death doula. And that's a real example.
Thank you. Questions and comments? Yes. We have a mic.
Hi, I'm Lydia Williamson-Sawyer. I'm doing a master's at LSE.
You don't have to apologise for that.
Well, I did my undergraduate here. Thanks for the really fascinating presentation. What came to mind was, in order to understand the Imaginaries of Immortality in the age of AI, how does that relate to questions of mortality, especially with the development of autonomous weapon systems and automated target recognition, which are leading to people, people not being able to be immortal. And in order for there to be digital immortality, how does that relate to questions of digital mortality and who gets to be immortal in the age of AI?
Thank you. Great. So, Saida, you study technologically mediated violence and therefore mortality when you're not thinking about the age of immortality.
I put in the spot here now.
So maybe I'll start. So when I'm thinking about immortality, I always, in the first place, I think about mortality. And I think that these two always go together. And there is no immortality without death. And without death, we will be just immortal. And it doesn't make any sense to talk about death. So for me, these two always go together, hand in hand. I absolutely agree that we can use AI to increase mortality, but at the same time we use this tool to help us stay longer in the digital space, and it's not a neutral thing. It very much depends on the political context, and there is a big question of who should be remembered and who should be in charge of deciding and why, and who has the responsibility to make that decision. And the list of dilemmas and concerns is endless. So that's why I'm thinking about this new field of research, this immortality studies, immortality that contains mortality and immortality together, just to emphasize the need to ask different questions, as you just said. Yeah.
And just perhaps to add to that, it's a very valuable question in the sense that these are platforms that are inevitably rooted in a political economy. So who gets to design these platforms? Who gets to choose what affordances are available? It's again very rooted in Western understandings and in Western settings. So it also poses other questions: whose lives are grievable, whose lives are worthy to become immortal. And again, this tends to reproduce certain Western logics of power, inevitably so. So it's a very good question, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we have another question here and then over here. But I saw that one first, and then we have some questions online as well that Julian is channeling.
Thank you so much. Very fascinating project. I was wondering, when I think about, digital mortality, the first thing that comes to mind for me is not the grief bots or digital assistants, but rather actually the trace that we leave after we die. Because right now, when people use social media much more often and their cookies accepted and different websites just are left in different data banks, I would say. And do we need to include that in our will now? Do we need to decide on those issues same as we decide on organ donations? And also, how much of personal autonomy is left for the person who will pass away when it comes to creating a digital avatar, for instance, using all that data? So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, there's a live scholarly debate about whether these constitute your digital remains, in the sense of, are they a part of yourself that is being left behind? Kasia.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. You mentioned about digital traces, which we call in this field of research digital remains, as Stephen just mentioned this term. And absolutely, that's the fuel for the digital immortality. We use all of this in order to produce this post-mortem representation of ourselves. And of course, again, it's not a neutral decision, and as you said. And the first and the most contested issue is consent, like how we should use data and who should be in charge of deciding. If I decide to do it for myself, the situation seems to be pretty straightforward. But if I want to create it for a third person, am I allowed to do so? Am I allowed to use our private conversations on WhatsApp or via email and feed the system with these information and allow the system to grow and work with this information. So yeah, so something that we argue in the paper that I prepared with Tomasz is that maybe we should discuss not only consent, but the idea of mutual consent, that it's not only me who is creating this, but there's always people who are intended users of this technology. So we should keep in mind those people who will be interacting with these systems. And they may not be happy with having digital avatar, post-mortem avatar, and that's completely okay. And they shouldn't be forced to be happy with interacting with post-mortem avatar. So that's why I think we should also find a way and create mechanisms to allow very different approaches to this. There are people who are happy with being remembered, but there are also people who are happy with being forgotten, and that's okay.
So not like in the Christian tradition where you're resurrected whether you like it or not and judged. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Just maybe one thing I'll add in relation to this question of digital remains is, so Kasia mentioned consent, and we can think about consent from the designer's point of view, how we can design for better consent mechanisms, more informed, more meaningful consent, so that people are actually aware what it is that they're agreeing to. For instance, when they're signing up, when they're creating a Facebook account, so they actually have a very good sense of how their data might be used. But it's very difficult to speak about the question of digital remains and the data, not necessarily how the data is then used to design a specific avatar, without thinking about the legal foundations around what happens with our data. So as many of you know, the GDPR doesn't really cover the deceased. So while the general protection, data protection regulation in the EU does help us manage our own data, it does offer certain protections. It doesn't cover the deceased. And I think that's where our next fight has to be. It is about this ownership after we die, which obviously is related to this question of consent that Kasia pointed to.
Great, thank you. A little follow-up? And you can't, if it is an interesting point. Thank you. Now we have some questions over here. Yes, let's take one and then two, and then I'll come to Julian for some online questions, and then some more from the room.
Thank you very much. And I'm particularly interested in the aspect of social connection. So how you'd mentioned that after the dinners, people had really come together and the importance of that. And there's this paucity of connection these days, increasing loneliness, isolation. So could this technology further exacerbate that, and how do you mitigate against it? So by forging these synthetic connections in the afterlife, what happens in real life?
Thank you. Well, I know this is an object of great interest for Tom. Does anyone in the room want to take it before I pass to him? Tom, I know you're also very interested in the impact of these technologies on loneliness.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, because I lost you for a second?
Try and be as precise as possible. Basically, in the context of rising social isolation and loneliness, what is a potential impact of trying to have a synthetic technology that is connecting people to effectively,
Got it. Well, I mean, as Stephen mentioned, I work on some fun topics, some with Kasia, death and grief. Otherwise, I'm also interested in loneliness and the impact of AI companions of different sort on these fundamental phenomena that we're witnessing today. Loneliness is positioned as something new, as something that is being exacerbated by technology. And one very particular, very concrete design strategy that we heard about from experts throughout, so India, China, Poland, but also elsewhere, is this very concrete need, at least for time limits on the use of these technologies. And this concerns both, this applies both to grief bots, but also other forms of AI companionship. So there has to be a mechanism that brings you back to the real world, essentially, that has to be designed into the process. So that's definitely something that came up. And the other thing that came up, which I think is very interesting, And we actually know about a team that is trying to experiment with this model that actually ensures that these experiences are essentially guided by human specialists, such as psychologists, that oversee the process of communicating with an AI companion, such as a dead bot or grief bot. So there, the technology becomes a prompt for a very different process. It's not a replacement for something. It's not meant to fill in a gap, but rather it becomes a prop for you to process something with the help of a professional, such as a psychologist, therapist, etc. So just to summarize, there are very concrete ideas for how we can battle this trend that we definitely see, where people become more and more addicted to specific technologies and therefore also stop engaging with the real world as much as they should for their own sake.
Anya, please.
Yeah, I would like to add something to this topic of loneliness and community. Like that was like my biggest insight from this whole experience, that during these dinner events there was a very particular atmosphere that developed throughout the evening, and many people were deeply moved, and many people, when the dinner finished, they wouldn't want to leave. They just stayed and they exchanged phone numbers, and what many of them shared was this. They said, wow, I never had a chance to tell anybody about my grandmother, and today I could introduce her to you, and you wanted to hear about her. So many of us, and that's not only in the so-called West, where sometimes we have this idea that death is a taboo, but somewhere in the East it's a much more normal part of life. It turns out it's not so true, because also in China and in India, we got this information that we don't have this space in our daily lives where we can share memories. And this is something very special, to meet strangers and just tell stories and memories, and not have this attitude of, oh, don't mention her father has died, but, oh yes, what was your father like? And people, many of them, they felt such a relief to be in a space where there are people who are alive, and in that community our deceased are also welcome. And I think that's what many of us are missing. So that was what, surprisingly, there was such an emphasis on this, which was for me much more interesting in the end than all the discussion about the technology.
Yeah, really, really important. Thank you. Yes, we had another question from here, and then I'll go to Julian, and then I'll come back to the room. Yeah.
Thank you. Fascinating. It seems to me that even before the digital and the AI world, there's a lot of contention about the narratives of a person's life and who they were and what their personality was like. You can think of it amongst a family, endless sort of humorous movies about, you know, your deceased forebear was like this. No, they weren't. They were like this. I was the favorite child. No, you weren't. I was. This is what happened. So we all create our narratives and our stories. And I'm just wondering about ownership. You know, one person, one organism has passed away, died, and then the whole community, whether it's a family or scale it up to a political world, and you can say that the history of this regime or that government versus another one, you get black and white, completely polarized views about what is the truth. And the poor person who's now died and is trying to be one avatar true to everybody, it doesn't work. Everybody's going to have a personalized relationship, and it's going to be as the living person, it's going to be my truth about that deceased person, surely. And so I'm not sure how it works, except I'm sure that there'll be a lot of money in it for lawyers and lawsuits in America, particularly.
Thank you. Great point. Would anyone like to respond?
Yes, absolutely. And we discuss a lot the idea of multiple avatars for one person, because I am a different person here and I am a different person at home, and in many different contexts, and that's true for all of us. So definitely that's one thing, and I think we don't have we understand more and more that these are only representations that work in a particular context. and these are not like real people, just a representation, just my imagine how I imagine them in this context. And I remember someone in India said, imagine grandma on Facebook and imagine grandma on Tinder. So, and I think it speaks volumes about who we are in different contexts. And you also mentioned the potential conflicts within family, for example, when someone wants to preserve an avatar of, let's say, mother, and siblings don't want to do this. And what we should do, and who should be, again, in charge of deciding, I want this, but they also should be, like, their interests, the other side, should be also respected. So that's a very complex legal issue, and we are just at the beginning of addressing these questions.
Thank you. So thank you to those online who have been posting questions. Julian has been channeling them like a medium.
Yeah, there's loads of questions here. Let me just start off with a couple. If there's time, maybe we could fit in some more. One asks, how realistic could an avatar be based on our digital remains? How much data do you need about a person? And then just pick one of the other ones. Lopakshi says, as AI versions of the dead begin to interact and evolve, they stop being simple archives and start behaving more like living presences. Do different cultures see this evolution as a form of rebirth or as a troubling refusal to let go?
Yeah, great, thank you. So how much data do we need? And also, is there a dividing line? As we leave more data behind us, it's being animated in different ways. And how do different cultures see it?
I think the answer to the first question is very easy and straightforward. A lot of data, and yes, can be very, very similar to us and can be very interactive and can be very, persuasive in a way that these are the real people. So that's also another problem here.
And I mean, just to bring back the a story from the documentary Eternal You of this woman who uploaded the conversations with her partner. And as we know, LLMs start diverging into various different conversations. And at some point she thought, this is not my partner anymore. And he, I think, even started to be a bit aggressive. So there are these risks, of course, when we use LLM and we feed them a vast amount of data that they just diverge into becoming something else. So that is another aspect about data that is important to think about and consider.
Yeah, thank you. Let's take some more questions from the room. Let's take some from over here. We'll take these two one at a time. Let's start with start with the easiest one to reach. That's right.
Thank you. My question was a bit more about these digital remains, and as our reliance on technology increases and our usage of it increases, and thus our kind of digital remains increases, will there be a point in which a line between the original deceased person and this avatar of this person merge and become kind of maybe unrecognizable?
Thank you.
Tom?
Well, I can start by saying that this is, I think you're pointing to an issue that has been explored by Antoinette Rouvroy, who's a political scientist based in Belgium, who in her work on algorithmic governmentality spoke about this issue of us becoming our own profile. In other words, well, she was referring back then to social media, what we see from recommender systems, and us essentially, in theory, getting what we want, but actually reshaping ourselves to match a version of ourselves seen by the system. And that's obviously a potential issue with the sorts of systems that we're talking about here as well. I'm not sure if I understood your questions correctly. And I suppose it goes back also to this question of accuracy. So Kasia mentioned that we need a lot of data to produce very good representations, the kind of representations that are less likely to create responses that we wouldn't have said ourselves. But obviously, most of the systems out there right now rely on scarce data. You don't need so much data to produce most of these post-mortem avatars, and the ones that that Kasia was describing, the very fancy ones, essentially, are also very expensive. So we know of one company in Germany and another one elsewhere that essentially charge around 10,000 euros for the production of this fancy and very accurate representation.
Thank you. Yes, let's take it. Well, we might come back to that. Let's take the question here.
Thank you. I found the term digital immortality a bit fancy, and you know, I understand why the tech industry is going in this direction, using this term, but I don't think it captures adequately what is going on. I think there's an old term which is much more appropriate for this thing. It's necromancy. Mm-hmm. It's the practice of summoning the dead, summoning ghosts, and trying to communicate with them. Now, in the past, it used to be done with people sitting mm-hmm. around a round table, touching their hands, using a medium. This time, it is done with AI, and mm-hmm. I guess it's going to be much more potent and much more convincing. And you try to gather multicultural experience. I've heard that you visited Poland, which is a deeply Catholic country, at least it used to be. I think the Catholic Church, necromancy is forbidden by the Catholic Church. So I was wondering whether you had any conversation with the officials of the church, the Catholic Church, and what were their opinions?
We did indeed, but before we come to that, I like the question a lot, thank you, but because these terms do matter, and calling it digital immortality can be deeply misleading. I agree. It's certainly not immortality. Nothing lasts forever in the way that immortality implies. It also implies a kind of personal survival that is really, you know, quite inaccurate, I would say. And there are lots of other terms, aren't there? Grief bots, death bots, and so on, avatars and whatnot. But I like the idea of ghosts that you mentioned, because we do have an uneasy relationship with these kinds of legacies. Along the way, we want to be connected to our loved ones, but we're anxious about them coming back in the wrong way. So these are very old anxieties that I think we've always had, and perhaps provide some useful metaphors for thinking about digital avatars. But anyway, Kasia, to the question about Poland and the engagement with the church, we did indeed have representatives of the. We had. Well, you tell us.
You tell the story.
No.
Yeah, actually, we wanted to have around the table religious leaders, but for some reason it didn't work out. Like, it doesn't mean that they didn't want to come, but for some logistic, personal reasons. So that was also important information, that when we were sending those invitations, the reaction was, okay, let's try to talk about this together, and no, like, oh my goodness, it's so strange, it's so creepy, let's leave it. And there was a person, an expert in Poland. He has background in computer sciences, but he is also very, very close to one of the parish in Poland. And that's a funny story, because he works on implementing AI, ChatGPT, in church, and people can use this technology and just walk in like 24/7 and ask for a prayer or ask for an excerpt from Bible, and people are curious, and they are engaging with this technology, and it's on the very early stage of implementation, but. This is to say that more and more, even very traditional institutions are open to these new technologies. And I'm originally from Poland, and it was also surprising for me that things are happening like this happening in Poland. But yeah, so it only shows that we are more and more adapt to these technologies. Because when I started this research, like almost a decade ago, the number one adjective that people use when we were talking about digital immortality was creepy. And today, nobody say this, or less people say this, but we ask much more like deeper ethical questions. So it also shows that we moved from one point to another.
And maybe just to add about the term and the concepts, I know philosophers here they grapple a lot with concepts, but I think the importance of digital immortality is that it underscores the medium in which these practices occur. So it could shift, it could be an AI or data immortality, but at this stage, I think it encapsulates all these various mediums that are digitalized and mediated through a certain kind of technology. So in that sense, I think there's an accuracy in the term.
Thank you. Yeah.
And can I,
Tom,
sorry.
please. Yep. Please.
Yes. Sorry, I just want to very quickly say that I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I actually do think that the Catholic Church needs to produce more rules, and specifically when it comes to digital immortality, specifically because with Kasia, not in Poland but elsewhere, we have seen more and more experiments done in collaboration with the Church. And for instance, one that we can definitely point to that is public, that is happening in Italy right now, is this project where a team working at the University of Padova is trying to essentially resurrect the youngest Catholic saint in Italy, who died a couple of years ago, was canonized very quickly, and the production of the saint's post-mortem avatar is done in collaboration with the saint's mother. So I think we need to very carefully observe what is already happening. And in a way, I actually do think that the Church and many other religious institutions should very explicitly manage these situations, because obviously when digital immortality is combined with religious practices, the space of vulnerability and the potential for manipulation is even bigger and higher. Yeah, thanks, and sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you. That's literally what you're here for. Right, thank you. Let's have a question here. Yes, and then we'll go to the back here.
Thanks. Yeah, my question is sort of related to that, and it's come up in various other ways. It's such a fast-moving field. As you said, 10 years ago, it was too fringe to be a PhD. And in that context of sort of almost sometimes described as exponential change, how do you maintain ethical baselines? How do you say that, I heard earlier, we must come back to the real life, the real world, rather than stay stuck with irreal chatbots? That ethical precept may not hold in a matter of years. What are your ethical baselines? How are you orienting yourself within that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one, of course, we face in all of the work in our centre where we think about the impact of AI. But I mean, it's a particularly interesting case, because I mean, the premise of this project is that these ethical baselines won't be the same around the world, that actually they're very much rooted in particular philosophical and religious and cultural traditions. And also, I suppose there's a difficult balance between saying, well, no, this is how we do things. These are our norms around death. And we need digital immortality and avatars to fit them on the one hand, but on the other hand, realizing, as I mentioned at the start, that they're actually technologically mediated and they will need to change and they will evolve. How do we manage this in a responsible way? Tom?
I'll just very quickly take this, because when I said this, I was expecting someone to comment on this, because obviously it's a shorthand, but maybe I should clarify that when I said, come back to the real world, I was just gesturing towards a trend that we know about, where deep interactions with a specific chatbot can exacerbate people's experience of loneliness. So very often when we look at studies that look at this experience, they are based on self-reporting. So users might immediately experience how actually interacting with a chatbot might make them feel better. But then what we need is better evaluation methods that actually allow us to look at the impact on the community as a whole. Maybe this person for themselves somehow feels better, but what is the impact on their relationship with their close ones, their family? Are they available for others that they should be available too. And here, of course, there is this normative conversation about, because again, I said should. So so if I had to point to one principle or value that I uphold when thinking about the ethics of these technologies, I would say community building and participation. So something that Anya started with, actually. Anything that doesn't destroy the community but helps to preserve it is something that we should be rooting for.
Thank you.
And here I just want to add, Kasia, your approach to the professionalization of the digital afterlife leader. So if you want to, I think this is I think it's very relevant to the question.
Yeah, because so the idea of professionalization of the digital afterlife industry came to me a few years ago when I look at the current state of this technology and stakeholders within the market. So these are only, or the majority of the stakeholders are commercial companies and users, only those two. And I started thinking, okay, we are missing a link here. We talk a lot about commercialization, commodification, but we do not talk about professionalization. So about someone who could actually enter the market and provide experience. Ideally, someone who is academically informed and has background in depth studies or related studies, because what's the problem when we look at the market right now is that many creators of these companies do not have any background in depth related studies. And when we think how delicate these matters are, it's very striking and surprising. So I think that bringing to the table these new professionals, but also allow the existing professionals to learn more about these emerging technologies and help them to bring their expertise to the table and support users of these technologies, that will be very, very important. And I would also add to your question that for me, when I think about the ethics, I think it's very difficult, obviously, to assess this ethical baseline, but I think what helps is the idea of expertise, which is understood as multidisciplinary, distributed, collective, so that we bring a lot of different voices to the table, people who are experts, as we had in our experts workshops, the 7 categories at least, members of the funeral industry, palliative care professionals, spiritual leaders, academics, and all of us and all of these people have very different experiences and competences, and we can work on this and build on this. So I would start there.
So you mentioned spiritual leaders, but of course for much of the last couple of millennia, it is exactly to priests we would have looked to preserve norms around existential moments like death, including through times of change. But now we look to people like Anya as death doulas in an increasingly secular society.
Like one topic that came up during the dinners again and again was using death bots or all these different solutions as a potential therapeutical tool, like a further development of already existing methods. Let's say you need a closing conversation with somebody who has died and you couldn't say sorry or you couldn't say something. There are many already existing methods, like writing a letter or putting somebody on an invisible chair in Gestalt therapy. There are many things that are already being done where you can get a sense of closure having a conversation with a dead person. So maybe a dead bot would just be one additional tool, but the interesting thing about these tools is that they need to be facilitated by a professional. So maybe we could have in the future therapists who have this additional qualification to prepare their clients for a meeting with their deceased person in a virtual space, and afterwards help them to integrate this. And during the dinner conversations, this was several times compared to places when you now can, for example, take psilocybin and be prepared for that and afterwards integrate it. So seeing the interaction with AI in the context of death as some kind of psychedelic experience that needs a safe setting.
Yeah.
That was a fascinating topic that came up a few times.
So these technologies could be helpful, but if they're situated in the right kinds of rituals with people with the right kind of expertise that can help to make sense of them for people.
Yeah, to not just throw people into this experience, and they could be damaging when they are not taken care of in a safe framework. We don't know that yet. No.
Right, I did promise I would take a question from the back, but we are running out of time rapidly, but as I promised I would, right at the back.
One of the things that these tools do really well is collective intelligence around human experience. So your point about ChatGPT and the interaction with the family at that time of death, and they're asking questions. Now imagine that's happening billions of times of that intimate experience. So what's your perspective that these tools actually have more intelligence because of the interaction that's coming from this collective community and building that collective intelligence versus the experts, which are very kind of niche for that moment. So how do we think about that?
Thank you. I want to take a couple of questions. I've been told we have a couple of minutes flexibility on the time. And we've had some people at the back who have been very patient. So this gentleman here, and then the young man at the very back.
So, sorry for shouting out earlier, but I'm not surprised at all that there are commercial companies trying to put this stuff out. What surprised me was that for 10,000 you can get something I think you described as accurate, and I'm just curious as to what that meant.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. And at the very back, the young. If you can wait for the mic, then yeah.
Are you collecting data to teach AI how to talk in these situations when people have died or when they are represented and they have already died?
Great, thank you. Yes. Who would like to respond to any of those points?
Yeah, can I, sorry.
Please do.
Just the question about accuracy, that's a very, so we obviously don't assume a stable idea of identity, and that's one of the core issues with these technologies and with the ideas behind them. But when I said accuracy, I actually meant a controlled image. So from the perspective of the person who wants to be immortalized in this way, these very expensive experiences are centered around this person's consent and their intent. So there is time for them to record long and guided interviews through which they preserve specific parts of themselves that they're happy to share with their loved ones after they pass away, but also with potentially a bigger community after they die. So just as sort of like a point of clarification, when I say accuracy, I actually meant a controlled image where the person who is being immortalized is in full control in how they're being represented, essentially.
Yeah, thank you. And it relates to a lot of the questions that have come up today about multiple narratives and consent and so on. Any final thoughts or responses before I hand to Anya? Well, in that case, in just a moment, I'm going to hand to Anya, who is going to introduce the exhibition, the installation that we have, and guide us through to it. But before I do that, please join me in thanking our fabulous panel.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this presentation and conversation and found it inspiring. So we're now about to come to the end of this part of our gathering. So we have heard Kasha's presentation of her preliminary results of quite an unusual project, I would say. A project that is not only purely academic, but located at the intersection of research and art of science and poetry. So in a few moments, we will leave the Frankopan Hall and we will move together to the Elena Hall, where you will be able to meet more people who were involved in this project, at least symbolically, because there you will see a photography installation by Tomasz Szuda. He created these beautiful portraits of our conversation partners from Poland, India, and China. And just like the overall project, these photographs, they connect humans across cultures and across time zones. But all of us, we are sharing this experience of being mortal beings in a very complex world. So you will see those people with whom we sat together and they shared their bittersweet stories and memories of loss and love with us while we were sharing a meal. So we will also in a moment invite you to have some drinks and some snacks and to talk with us and with each other, so that this can become the 10th dinner of this project. So Katarzyna, she has asked me in my role as a ritual designer to facilitate this transition, our moving from one space to, moving from a space of discussion and reflection and intellectual debate into another space, a space of art and intuition and sensual perception. So I got this task and I thought, whoa, how to do that? So from a perspective of cultural anthropology, the transition from one state to another state, especially when experienced collectively, can be called a rite of passage. And the crucial part of such a ritual is the space in between. So the moment when we have left one place, but have not yet arrived in the next, when we are between and betwixt, in a liminal state between this room and the next one. So when we are on our way, walking along the corridor. So Katarzyna, also known as Dr. Kashi in New Delhi, she asked me, how could we consciously shape this walk? How could we make our walking meaningful? And I asked myself, okay, how could we make these steps we are going to take, how could we add meaning on it? So I went looking for inspiration in other social situations that involve meaningful walking. And in the context of our research topic, the first thing that quite obviously came to my mind was a funeral procession. So maybe that's going to be a bit too dark if we kind of create a funeral procession here, because that vibe would be too serious and it wouldn't quite fit that warm and bittersweet atmosphere that we experienced during our dinners. And then I thought, Kasia is from Poland, home of the Polonaise dance. So maybe we could all add up in pairs and we could elegantly float along the no, that would not work. Where else do people walk in meaningful ways? A parade. Maybe I could give you flags and banners and then together we could march to the no, not a good idea. What about a pilgrimage? Like dragging ourselves towards a sacred space, crawling on our knees. I'm pretty sure I could not convince you to do that. Maybe a fashion runway. I could invite you to strut it out, serving Cambridge eleganza. That would actually be really cool, but no. So other walks, meaningful walks. Game of Thrones, Walk of Shame? No, definitely not. So maybe I should look at pop culture, some iconic walks from pop culture. Do you remember that Bittersweet Symphony music video where Richard Ashcroft walks arrogantly down the street, bumping into other people? Tempting, but also probably not really today. So pop music. Maybe should I suggest that we go there step by step, or I could encourage you to walk like an Egyptian, slightly too silly for such a serious occasion. And then I thought, well, let's ask AI. And guess what ChatGPT suggested? ChatGPT suggested, let's become present. Take a deep breath in, breathe out, and then let's walk together in silence. That would not be awkward at all. So after collecting many bad ideas, I gave up. I went for a walk, and then I decided I would tell you this. Thank you all for being here with us. Thank you for giving Katarzyna and the whole team your most valuable gifts, your time and your attention. We will now leave this room, and I will welcome you into the other room where we invite you to activate your senses. Listen to the sounds over there. Have a look at the photographs and touch the material they are printed on. Smell and taste a glass of wine, and maybe have a chat with each other. And when we go there, please do not walk on your knees. Please do not wave any flags, and please try not to bump into each other. If anybody needs support, please help each other. Make sure that nobody gets lost, and take good care of yourself and of each other. Let's go.
Dionysus and Baku. Yes, the sun must be significance of big and small stars. You can choose. Got the biggest one. Yeah. I pick a big one for my father. Let's put them all here in this. 看到这个，我家里。Okay.